Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So as you guys know, I recently did a video called Random Things That I Love in Books. And if you haven't seen that video, definitely go watch it. It's just me talking about like really specific things that I love in books. Like if a book has that thing, I usually end up really liking it. And I also give you some book recommendations that kind of follow those tropes. And it was just kind of a fun video. So if you haven't seen that video yet, I'll definitely link it down below. But in this video, I'm going to be talking about things that I don't like in books, or very specific things that just drive me insane in books and I just can't stand it. And I'm going to give you some book recommendations, or not recommendations I should say, but some books that really made me realize like how much I hate this, and it kind of probably made me give the book a lower rating because of these reasons. And so we're going to be talking about those books. And so this is kind of like a books I don't recommend video, because a lot of these books are probably going to be books I don't like. So the first one is romance, where there is a push-pull between characters, keeping them apart throughout the whole story, and then they finally get together at the very end. This drives me nuts. Now don't get me wrong, I love a good like slow burn type of thing where it takes a really long time for the characters to get together. Like that's great, and I love that because it makes it's so much more satisfying when they do finally get together. But one book that this happened in was, what was it called? Okay, it was called One Day in December by Josie Silver. And I've talked a lot about this book because it's literally one of my least favorite romance novels I've ever read. And it had this trope in it where they're literally like not getting together through the whole entire book. You know that they're kind of like wanting to be together, but something is keeping them apart. And then literally in like the last 2 pages, they finally like admit their feelings for each other and like kiss and like be together, but at the very end, so you don't get any of the satisfying like couple time where they're actually together. You only get it at the very end, and then the book is over and you're like, really? I waited this whole entire book for them to finally get together and I don't even get to enjoy them being together. I can do this though if it's like a series, because obviously you're going to get some of them as a couple in later books and stuff, but if it's just a standalone and I don't get to enjoy their relationship actually like together, then I don't want it. The next one is when characters aren't described right away. So this is super important to me, and this actually just happened in a book that I read recently, and I was like, are you serious? But one of the reasons why I actually didn't finish The Raven Boys, I started that series, and part of the reason I didn't continue on with it, and I think I stopped halfway, is because she did not describe the characters right away, and it drove me nuts. Like, I need to have a very clear description of what these characters look like right away. I don't care if it's awkward, I don't care if it's just like a weird way of putting it into the book, you just need to describe them to me. Like, you know, Arya walked in with her long chestnut hair and her green eyes were beautiful. That's literally all I have to say, because now I know that Arya has like brunette hair and green eyes. I just need to know that so I can get her character in my head, because one thing that I have a hard time doing is like I'll get a character in my head and I'm like, okay, I guess I'll just make this character blonde, and then like later in the book they say that she has black hair and you're like, she's been blonde the whole time, I can't just change her character now. And it annoys me when she doesn't match the character description in the book, and it bothers me for the rest of the time. Like that drives me nuts. And The Raven Boys did this, and it was making me distracted the whole time because I was trying to picture these characters and I couldn't picture them, so I finally just DNF'd the book because I was like, I don't even know what these characters look like and it's driving me nuts. It was a main key thing, I think, as to why I couldn't connect myself to the characters. Like I said, I don't even care if they say it in an awkward way that doesn't even fit into the book, just tell me what they look like. Even if you just put it in parentheses, this character has brown hair. Like, that's better than nothing. Too much description. Now, I don't mind description in certain types of books. Like, there are certain books that, like, description really makes a difference and it can, like, really build the world, especially if it's, like, a very dreamy, whimsical world, or there's a very specific thing about that world that makes it what it is. Like, coastal town books, I don't mind a lot of description because I think it really sets, like, the ambiance and the feel. But there's certain books that don't need description, and those are the type of books that I can't stand overly descriptive writing. And I talked about a book called Perfect Little Children. This was by Sophie Hannah, and this chick described everything. And it's this certain thing that I can't stand. It's almost like the author is picturing something in their head, right? Like they're writing their book and they're picturing a certain scene in their head. And so they want the reader to picture exactly what they're picturing. Like they don't let the reader kind of create their own picture in their head. They don't say, you know, a cabin with a garden in front of it, and like the reader can create whatever cabin with a garden in front of it that they want. They want the reader to picture exactly what they're picturing, and I think that that's such a poor way of writing. It adds too much, the reader doesn't care, especially if it's like a thriller and you just want to get to the point already, like you want it to move faster. It's like, I don't care what this kitchen looks like. Like, I don't care, just tell me that it's like a really, really nice high-end kitchen and I can picture a kitchen like that. Like, I don't need to picture your kitchen. Okay, this is my least favorite twist in a book. When someone is pretending to be someone else and no one can tell, not even their loved ones. So I've read 2 books that have this kind of twist. I'm not going to say what books they are because it is kind of like the bigger twist at the end, and so I don't want to like spoil the books. But there's been 2 books that I've read where there's like a character, and at the very end, like their loved ones find out that they're somebody else playing somebody else. So they're like stealing someone's identity, right? But like the person that they're tricking should know that they're not the actual person. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, if Elena came to my door, or like my brother or something came to my door, and all of a sudden he had blonde hair and he's like, oh, I'm your brother, I would be like, you're not my brother. Like, you don't look anything like my brother. And he's like, yeah, but I dyed my hair. I'd be like, you're not my brother. Like, I know how my brother talks. I know his like small little micro movements. Like, I would know that you're not my brother. Like, that kind of thing, it is so unrealistic to me. I can't suspend my disbelief, and it's just, I think, a cheap twist that is very unbelievable, and I don't like it, and because I just don't think that it would happen. Okay, so this one is something that I actually realized recently, and it was after I read Court of Silver Flames. Now, I gave that book 5 stars because I love Cassian, and I just love that whole world and everything, but one of the things that I hated from that book was the over-sexual couple missing the sweet romance. Now, this is something actually, when I read that book, I was like, whoa, like I didn't realize how much I need like this sweet romance element to actually make the romance satisfying, because I felt like Cassie and Nesta were so aggressively sexual with each other, and that was fine, but like it missed like that romance where they're like very romantic with each other. That was missing for me, and so I kind of felt like I missed the romance a little bit in that book. It was very sexual, but it didn't have the romance. And then also, the second book in the Touch of Darkness series, what is it called? The Game of Fate? Exactly the same problem. I felt like Hades was like really overly sexual, but there isn't that sweetness necessarily. I think it was a little bit better, but I do like the sexual part too. Like, it kind of has to have both to make me feel fully satisfied with the book. Like, I have to have a little bit of both. I can't have one and not the other, you know what I mean? So the next thing is traveling. Waiting for them to be where they are supposed to be so they can do the thing that they're supposed to do. So some good examples of this would be Strange the Dreamer and Blood and Honey and then Obsidio. So all of these had a lot of traveling in them where they're going to do something important when they get to their location, right? And so you kind of want them to get to their location so they can do the thing that the plot is based around. But then there's like this whole area at the beginning or in the middle of them just traveling and like talking about what they're gonna do and planning what they're gonna do. I get so bored in those types of novels, and I know that things happen here and there while they're traveling, but for me, like, if I know that they're going somewhere to do something, I just want to be at that place to do that thing. Like, if I know it's gonna happen, I don't want to wait for it. So I hate like the planning and like the traveling and planning. Like, it just is so boring to me. With Strange the Dreamer, I actually gave that book like 5 stars. It's an amazing book, so even though it did have some traveling elements to it, it didn't like drive me that crazy. But Blood and Honey was like the worst. That was a 2-star book for me. I hated it. And then Obsidio was also 2 stars, and it was for the same reason. I got so bored. I feel like Children of Blood and Bone was kind of like this, like a quest story. I just don't think quest stories are really for me. Anything that's repetitive. Now, if you guys watch my book reviews, like, you know that I hate repetitive writing. B.A. Paris is an author that is extremely repetitive. She kind of gets her mind set on like a storytelling device, and then she'll use it over and over and over and over because that's the like device that she chose to make this thriller novel work and get to the end. And I kind of feel like she'll choose something and then she'll just do it over and over again, and I get really bored with repetitive writing, and she's probably one of the more repetitive writers. So her books are never really 4 or 5-star books for me. And you will see if you look back in my old reviews, like, I will always mention a book that is repetitive. Like, repetitive books always stand out to me, and I can always pinpoint books that come across as really repetitive. Okay, so this is very specific, and people are gonna probably hate me for this. This is a little bit of a controversial opinion, but just bear with me for a second. Let me just explain myself. So, modern poetry books that only talk about abusive relationships and men. So, I love modern poetry to a certain degree. I think modern poetry has its place. I think that sometimes modern poetry should have a different name. Like, it shouldn't be called poetry, it should be called something else, because I don't necessarily think all modern poetry is necessarily poetry. But one thing that I keep seeing in modern poetry is that any modern poetry that is written by women, they're always talking about men and abusive relationships, and what those abusive relationships did to them and their self-esteem and all that kind of stuff. Which, don't get me wrong, that happens and it's a big part of our lives. But there's so much more to being a woman than men. There's so much more to being a woman than abusive men. Like, what about motherhood? What about friendship? What about, like, love in other forms? What about pets? What about passion, inspiration, art? And I feel like that's all modern poetry is anymore, especially when it's written by women. I just want something new. I want something different. And I feel like that's all I'm getting when I read modern poetry anymore. Like, our insecurities and, like, why we have them, it's because of men. And I'm just like, can we write about, like, motherhood or something? Or, like, okay, so this is a big one. And I actually realized this one after I read The Cruel Prince. Now, don't get me wrong, I like The Cruel Prince. It was a pretty decently fun story to read. It wasn't my favorite fantasy romance. I think I gave some of the books 3 stars, some of the books 4 stars. But one of the main reasons why this book series got on my nerves just a little bit is because the couple didn't have a ton of interaction, but they fall in love. So I kind of felt like in this book series, like, we didn't get a lot of on-page interaction between Jude and Cardan. Like, they didn't really talk very much. And whenever they were in a room talking, like, they would always get interrupted. Always. And so I kind of felt like there was some bad communication because they would just get interrupted and then have to go their separate ways. But then by the end of the series, they're, like, super in love. And I'm like, why do I feel like they didn't talk enough to fall in love? Like, they were never talking deeply with each other about themselves and their personal world and life and ideas. Like, I feel like when couples aren't on page together a lot, talking a lot, and then they fall so deeply in love, it just doesn't make sense to me. I felt like The Cruel Prince was, like, very much marketed as, like, a romance, but I didn't really get that much romance with it. And I know that authors do that to kind of make tension, and they want it to be, like, this slow burn, like, tension. Like, I just want them to talk, you know what I mean? But, like, sometimes it's done really poorly to where they never talk, but then they fall madly in love with each other, and I'm like, what? Books that take place in high school and have high school drama. So I like YA novels, but I'm very picky about my YA novels. If YA novels take place too much in, like, high school, in the high school setting, and then they also have a ton of high school drama, like there's, like, the mean girl, and there's, like, all of this drama going on, it just is so boring to me. Like, I lived through that time in my life. Like, I don't really like reading about it. It's one reason I didn't love Female of the Species. I felt like that kind of took place, like, within that high school drama world. I can do YA contemporaries if they take place more outside of the high school realm, or they have a whole plot line that doesn't relate to high school, if that makes sense. Like, Eliza and Her Monsters did take place in high school, but the plot, like the main plot, was outside of that high school realm. You know what I mean? Okay, this is gonna be like, this is controversial and I'm really sorry, but it's just how it is for me, okay? Like, I can't help it, and don't get mad at me for this, but unattractive male love interests, or, like, nerdy male love interests. Like, the book that I read recently, The Honey Don't List by Christina Lauren, the main love interest kept being described as, like, nerdy kind of. And I just don't like love interests that are described as, like, nerdy. Not conventionally attractive is what they say. I like myself a manly man that is fine. Like, that's what I want to picture in my head. And a lot of times it takes away from the love story for me a little bit, because I like a very masculine man, a man that takes control, a man that takes charge, and because the character interacts in that kind of way, it's just not something I'm super into, and so it usually takes away from the love story a little bit for me. Memory loss in the middle of a story. This one drives me nuts. Okay, so the Winter's Curse trilogy. I love that trilogy. It was really, really good. It was satisfying. It was fun. But there's a moment in the series where the main character loses her memory in the middle of the books, and the thing that drives me crazy about this specific thing is you feel like you're basically just taking a step back and nothing in the first, like, part of the book or the first part of the series even happened, because they can't remember any of it. So, like, if the character loses her memory and she doesn't remember that she fell in love with this guy, it's like, well, why did I read the whole beginning of that book? Because she doesn't remember it anyways. So now it's like they have to, like, re-fall in love or something. Like, that doesn't happen very often in books, but when it does happen, like, I just don't like it. And I feel like, what is it called? Gods and Monsters, the third book in the Serpent and Dove trilogy. I feel like they're going to use this trope, and I'm really scared. If they don't use this trope, let me know in the comments below if you guys have read it. But I am afraid that that's kind of the trope that she went with, and I'm not excited for it. I love memory loss, like at the beginning of the book, where you're trying to figure out why they lost their memory, but it has to happen at the beginning of the story. No personality diverse characters. So when characters are all the same. So a good example of this was Obsidio by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. I loved Illuminate, and I actually liked Gemini as well. But with Obsidio, I feel like every single character in that book were exactly the same character. Like, same voice, same sarcasm, same like funny little like witty banter. Like every single character had that same like kind of like badass, like funny, sarcastic personality type. And I'm like, why do all of these characters feel the same? Like I would read the different couples and all of the couples had the same dynamic because they all had the same personalities. Like I want a meek, shy girl character that's kind of a little bit scared. Then I want the badass girl character. And then I want like the party girl character. And then I want like the masculine man with tattoos. And then I want this character. Like I want them all to be like slightly different and have different personalities so their dynamics are all different. Like I feel like Sarah J Maas does a really good job with really pinpointing who her characters are. But like this Obsidio book was absolutely horrible when it came to character personality diversity. Impulsive characters that don't think things through and whine about the consequences. I hate this so much. So one of my least favorite books ever was The Sky is Everywhere by Jandy Nelson, and so many people love this book, but the reason I don't like this book is because the main character keeps making like really dumb decisions, and she knows that she's making dumb decisions, she's aware of it, but she keeps doing it anyways, and then when things backfire on her, she whines the whole time. And she's like a huge bitch to her mom the whole time. When I'm like, you're the one that's being stupid, and you know you're being stupid, and you keep doing these dumb things, and then you whine about them. I hate that in characters. I feel like it makes characters so unlikable when they have this personality type where they just do stupid things and then they whine about their stupidity. Like, oh, this next one, oh, I hate this so much. So I read this book called The Child Finder. And I read this book literally probably in like 2017 or something. It was a long time ago. And I wanted to throw this book across the freaking room. Like I wasn't like bored with this book, I was pissed at this book. And it is chapters that finish off on a cliffhanger and then the next chapter starts in a new perspective. And this happens over and over and over and over again. So it's like this author is trying to make like something, they're trying to create tension, right? And they write like these really intense scenes and then like right as something is supposed to like happen, the chapter stops and you're like, really? And then they start at like a new chapter from like maybe a new perspective and you're like, are you serious? And so you think that when they go back to the other perspective, they're gonna start back from like where it left off. And it sort of does, but the tension is gone. The tension is gone because you didn't get to finish it. You were very tense reading it, and then it just stops, and then now you have to go to a different perspective. But then they go back to the original one, and you're just like, well, this isn't as exciting as it was because, like, the tension is gone. Like, you ruined it. And this book did this every single chapter. Every single chapter, I was like, ooh, what's gonna happen next? And then they would just stop it and, like, start somewhere else, and I'm just like, ah. I love good cliffhanger chapters if the next chapter starts right back up at the cliffhanger. Like, I have to have it be continuous. And if that's the case, I love it. I love a good cliffhanger chapter, but I hate it when it's like teases you over and over and over and over again. I felt like the book was like a tense book, but you had no relief from any of the tension ever. Another thing I hate, and this is the last thing that I have for this video, is dreams and flashbacks. I hate dreams. I mean, I understand dreams, like if they have a reason, like if they push the plot forward in some sort of way, but when there's just dreams for dream's sake that really don't add to the story, like I hate them. I'll just scan entire pages or entire paragraphs, like I'm like, I don't really care about this, like it's just a dream. Or like flashbacks when they go back in time and they're like talking about something that happened in the past, even if it relates to the current plot, I still don't like stepping back in time. Like I find it boring. Like it just takes me out of the story when we move back and do a flashback. And every single time a flashback happens, I'm like, ugh, I have to like start here, like really? So flashbacks are something I just don't really like that much. I'll read them and they don't completely take away from a book for me, but I just don't enjoy them. It just takes me out of the story and I just kind of like continuous plots. I like single timeline. It's just the way that I like to read. I just like things that are like nice and linear. Those are the very highly specific things that I hate in books and can completely take away a book a star or 2 stars from books for me, and sometimes they'll even cause me to DNF, as you guys can see. So let me know in the comments below what one that I mentioned is like your absolute least favorite, or if you have something that drives you nuts that I didn't talk about in this video. I'd be very, very curious to hear your guys's like very specific things that you hate in books. And I think that's it, guys. So I will talk to you in my next video, and I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.